and welcome to Skylight Books. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's a nice night, and we're glad that you came here to the bookstore. We have a lot of author events here, and so I just would like to tell you about a few that are upcoming. We have on June 28th, which is Friday, we have Don Fonte. On July 17th, we have Chuck Klusterman, and July 24th, Rebecca Solnit, and William Friedkin will be here on July 26th. So if you are a book lover and an indie bookstore lover, come on out to those events. We also, I don't know if you guys are aware, but here at this Skylight Books independent bookstore, we have a Friends with Benefits Club. And what it is basically it's a membership, and it helps the store, and you get special perks like 10% off books and DVDs, 20% off selected Skylight bestsellers, free media mail shipping in case you want to do your online ordering with Skylight Books. And then there are also special member events. So if you're interested in that, that also helps us as an independent bookstore. If you have one of these in your pocket, perhaps you could turn it to a silent situation because I'm going to do that too because mine is on ring. This is really, you're going to have to play with this because it seems like it's slipping. But this evening, I think it's fine. He's taller, so it's good. This evening we have Kevin West. We're delighted to have him. And if you haven't already had, I hope you've all, if you haven't had it now, please take some afterwards, some delicious preserves. Kevin West is from rural Blount County in eastern Tennessee.
Blunt.
Oh, Blunt.
Blount County.
Like Blunt?
Yeah.
Blount County in eastern Tennessee. And went to experimental college in the White Mountains of California. For 13 years, he was on staff at W Magazine with postings in fabulous New York, Paris, and here in Los Angeles, where he was the West Coast editor, and he still lives here in LA. He runs the blog Saving the Season, writes about food, culture, and travel, and produces a retail collection of jams and marmalades, which, by the way, are delicious. I had the boysenberry, so good. Certified as a master food preserver, and he is here this evening with his new book, Saving the Season, where we're all going to learn about a lot of amazing things to eat. Please welcome Kevin West.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Skylight Books, so much for having me. This is, I know it's a little odd to have a reading from a cookbook, but this is sort of an odd cookbook. I'm a liberal arts major. And I think because of the lingering influence of that education, when I started preserving, I got really interested in the world around preserving. So not just the recipes, but also what you can learn from a subject when you look at it closely. And so the book, the blog originally was supposed to be just a kitchen log, and then it turned into something else. And the book is a kind of document of that journey of discovery about the world that began with some jam. There's a lot of narrative writing in here for a cookbook, and I'm just going to read a couple of little short selections to give you a feel for what the book's about. This is the preface. This is a book about preserving and home canning, or putting up, as one might say where I'm from, and it will cover jam, jelly, marmalade, and other sweet preserves, pickles and briny things, canned tomatoes, liqueurs, candies, and the complement of condiments that includes relishes, sauces, and salsas. Why bother preserving? Well, so that you can eat your efforts later, of course, and give them to other people to eat too. I do it to save the season. Putting up used to be how plenty prepared for want. Foodstuffs were processed in a season of abundance, when the wild blackberries came in, when hogs were slaughtered at the first cold snap, and brought out to eat in some later time of scarcity. Today, we don't suffer the winter hunger known for most of human history because the grocery store is always stocked. Not that long ago, however, it was the agricultural cycle, it was nature, that determined what was on the table, and lusty eaters had to anticipate the harvest of each month, when gardens, orchards, fields, woods, rivers, oceans, and skies delivered a copious annual bounty of a particular thing at a particular moment. We've forgotten today to wait for seasonal delicacies, and as a punishment, the grocery store has become a year-round warehouse of indifferent fruit and vegetable staples, some of which are absurdly imported from the ends of the earth. Just a generation ago, which is to say when I was little, Strawberries were a cause for celebration in the spring. My mother and I made annual trips to a pick-your-own farm, where we were always amazed by how good the strawberries were and by how quickly you could pick more than you could eat. In August, we visited my West grandparents, Grandpapa. Grandpapa come up a lot in the book. The book is dedicated to them. In August, we visited my West grandparents, Grandpapa, and when we returned to South Carolina from their farm in Blount County, Tennessee, my mother's baby blue VW Bug would be loaded literally to the roof with bags of corn, buckets of okra and squash, watermelons, and flats of Papa's homegrown tomatoes. Papa would say, "There's only two things that money can't buy, and that's true, true love and homegrown tomatoes." When Gran put them up in a quart mason jar, Papa's tomatoes were as good in January as they had been in August. And that's what I mean by saving the season. So, oh my God, we've lost this. I don't know, can you all hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
We're not a big group, and I can talk up. Yesterday was the official pub date. Yesterday, by sheer coincidence, was also Gran's birthday. Gran is gone, but yesterday she would have been 97 years old. And being a Southerner, I'm a little superstitious, of course, so I attribute great significance to the fact that the book hit on her birthday. But that's just to say that this is the first time I've done one of these. So this afternoon I was wondering what in the world I was going to read tonight, and then I thought, oh, it's a bookstore. And there were two bookstores that were very important to me when I was working on this cookbook, and I wrote a little piece about them, and I'm going to read that piece now. This is the recipe introduction for agridolce spring onions. Yields 1 pint. There used to be a store in West Hollywood called the Cook's Library, and after I got serious about preserving, I repeatedly threw money at it. Not that there were many books on the shelf marked jams and pickles at the way back of the store, but by the time I could navigate the other sections there and back, I'd have a leaning pile of things that I just had to have. Books are a vice, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. The best of the jams and pickles shelf included Christine Ferber's Mes Confitures, which I read with wonder, especially her recipes for fig and Gewürztraminer with pine nuts, white cherry with raspberry, and banana with bittersweet chocolate. But the book was for me as full of frustration as inspiration, and Madame Ferber led me to ruin many pounds of good fruit. One got the impression that she had published her cookbook to avoid telling anything about how she actually makes preserves. So French. The Cook's Library also delivered famed Prince's Jellies, Jams, and Chutneys, which tells a preserving story from the other side of the channel. Prince is a food journalist who clearly knows her way around the preserving repertory, and I learned a lot from her. You might even say she was one of my teachers. But the book is dinky. Somehow you feel as if it's the cheap digest version of a larger guidebook, which is what I would rather have had. Also, there's something scatterbrained about jellies, jams, and chutneys. She raises points and then briskly marches on without addressing them. Or she'll send you into such and such a page to learn more, and the detour proves to be a blind alley. Prince doesn't bother with the boiling water bath either. If y'all are canners, you know what I mean. If not, I'll address it in questions. Prince doesn't bother with the boiling water bath either, preferring instead such charmingly antiquated closures as cellophane seals, which are more closely related to the 19th century than the 21st. So British. About the time that I'd made myself a regular at the Cook's Library, it went out of business. Feeling stymied, I trolled the internet for obscure dealers in cookbook arcana, and to my genuine surprise, found one named Janet Jarvis in Pasadena. I noted her coordinates and set out, unaware that I had more or less found the address of Ali Baba's cave. The Jarvis treasury is guarded by cats. As you approach, a feline odor emerges to greet you on the sidewalk. And when you enter the door, a cat or two will swirl around you the way that waves cling to your ankles when you walk at the beach. But to behold the view from inside Jarvis's door is to believe her claim to have 30,000 volumes. The shop is a stupefaction of cookbooks. Scholarly editions of 19th century classics like Lettuce Bryan's The Kentucky Housewife, which is a real wonder, it's a masterpiece. 1843, I think is the date. Collectible early printings of The Joy of Cooking, and cast-off dollar copies of the latest from Rachel Ray. Shoppers are welcome, provided they don't take up too much space. The passageways are mere cracks between book-lined cliffs. Jarvis herself looked nothing like what I had imagined. Tanned and sinewy, she might have passed for a rah-rah triathlete, but she spoke quietly and gave the impression of being painfully shy. Because she seemed to know everything about her subject, however, she also visibly enjoyed having her expertise tapped. On a subsequent visit, when I asked her for something on the history of Thanksgiving, Jarvis mentioned an article published a decade earlier in an academic journal. After scouting a chaotic corner of the store for half a minute, she handed it to me. I was floored, and unless my eyes failed me, she allowed herself a glimmer of due self-congratulation. On that first trip to Jarvis's Emporium, I reluctantly left only when my pile threatened to become too heavy to carry. Among the finds was a 1950s hardback, no dust jacket, with an orange binding illustrated with a buxom woman in a button-sleeved gown, her arms upraised and her mouth operatically open. Behind her appears to be the London Bridge. The book's title is non sequitur, West Coast Cookbook. I'd never heard of the author, Helen Brown, and the book devotes only 4 pages out of 400 plus recipes to preserves and pickles, but the recipes for cherry olives, bodega beans, and Tiburon onions grab me. The book costs $4, which for a few good recipes would be a bargain at twice the price. At home, I made Tiburon onions with onions the size of ping pong balls, and they were delicious, with sweet golden raisins balanced against the sour of wine and vinegar. A little tomato paste provided color, herbs, and earthy depth. It was an unfussy and efficient recipe that yielded masterful results. So American. I studied Mrs. Brown's volume more closely. Its publication antedated the opening of Chez Panisse by nearly 20 years, but it sings the praises of the Pacific Slope in the same seasonal regional key as Alice Waters, whom my generation esteems as the inventor of California cuisine. Brown devotes wonderful chapters to fruit, vegetables, seafood, and salads, and she writes knowledgeably about olives and olive oil, herbs and spices, wine, all rather specialized subjects for her era. She currently dismisses convenience food and recipes that rely on them. Committed to the multiple cuisines of California's immigrant communities, Brown demonstrates a knowledge of Latino and Asian cooking and sound judgment on which foreign recipes will best adapt to the mainstream table. Her collection of game recipes, venison, small birds, rabbit, bear, squirrel, is one of the best I've seen anywhere. What's more, the tone of Brown's writing conveys the sunny, confident, unpretentious, democratic gumption of those who for 150 years have moved west to avoid the convention-bound strictures of back east. She writes in her introduction, "This is a book of West Coast cuisine, if anything as simple as our cookery can be called a cuisine. These are the recipes that show the versatility of our cooks, not the high-salaried exponents of la haute cuisine, but the cooks, both male and female, who are fascinated by the kitchen and whose greatest pleasures lie in discovering some new ways to serve some old familiar food. West Coast cooks improvise." This is still her. West Coast cooks improvise. They have ever since, in the early days, they had to use whatever was on hand or else starve. Today they still improvise, although they are blessed with plenty, and they frequently do it with remarkable success. That is why we not only believe we should have the finest food in the world, we don't honestly see how we can avoid it. I loved her immediately. Astonishingly, Mrs. Brown's volume anticipates the food trends of the past decade, the local, seasonal, artisanal, vegetable-based, cross-cultural, mindful, and whole food approach to eating. Who was this woman? Once I knew, I felt sad that I even had to ask. History teaches us that fame is fleeting, sic transit gloria mundi, and Helen Brown's too brief afterlife proves it. According to the Oxford Companion to American Food and Drink, Brown was born in 1904 and lived her married life in Pasadena, which coincidentally was the birthplace of Julia Child, as you all probably know already. By the late 1930s, Brown was known in New York as the West Coast Food Establishment, and her professional cohorts included Child and Craig Claiborne. James Beard was a close friend of hers. They co-wrote a book together on outdoor cooking in 1955 and maintained a twice-weekly correspondence that was published in 1944. The Oxford Companion confides, quote, "Beard was deeply attached to her. She functioned somewhat as an older sister." Brown died of cancer in 1964. When I got to the end of that entry, I was startled by the name of its author, Janet Jarvis.
Oh.
Later, on another trip to the shop, I asked Jarvis about it. She had not known Brown, but as a young dealer in 1994, Jarvis had bought the bulk of Brown's cookbook collection from the author's estate. Some of the 10,000 books have been damaged in a fire after Brown's death, others have been chewed by rats, but the purchase helped establish Jarvis's name in the book trade. I asked her why Brown isn't more famous today. I don't know, said Jarvis. Maybe she died too soon. Brown's Tiburon onions inspired one of my favorite savory recipes in the book. My version is faithful to the original, apart from some small tweaks to the seasoning, some explanatory notes. Agrodolce means sweet and sour in Italian. Tiburon is a seaside village in Marin County. Tiburon is the Spanish word for shark. Agrodolce spring onions would go well with any grilled meaty fish, like tuna, marlin, and, naturally, shark. You want one more?
Yeah.
One more sort of, it's probably about the same length as that. It's a couple pages, 3 pages. The news of the day, the news from the Supreme Court is what made me want to read this one. This is a road trip. Cherry time in late May. Green Valley is my house in Laurel Canyon, and so the road trips are all like Green Valley to someplace. So this was Green Valley to Johnson Hollow, Tennessee. Johnson Holler, as we might probably say. My father, Fred West, was born and raised in Blount County, Tennessee. 30 years ago, he commenced his preparations to die in Union County, about an hour's drive to the north, when he and Bob Sharp built themselves a house and planted a garden in Johnson Holler, a topographic crumple in the backwoods community of Sharp's Chapel. My father was in fine health then, as he is today, thank goodness, but moving to a place as remote and insular as Johnson Holler is tantamount to declaring that you don't intend to leave again. Some may not be entirely familiar with the old-fashioned word hollow. The best explanation I know comes from Home Ground, Language for an American Landscape, which is a really magnificent reference book edited by Larry Lopez, the author Larry Lopez of Arctic Dreams. This is what Home Ground has to say about the hollow. Throughout most of the North American continent, a hollow is a scooped-out place in the land. The term is used to describe many features: a small sheltered valley, as in Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow, or in the Catskill Mountains of New York State, a notch or pass in the mountains. In A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains, that's the title of the book, Isabella Bird writes, quote, "Of the blue hollow at the foot of Long's Peak, where the hoarfrost crisps the grass every night of the year." End quote. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, however, the word is pronounced holler and is used to describe the seam where two mountains join. In a hollow, land rises up on 3 sides. Up the creek, that is to say, up the upstream, up the creek, right? And so up each flank of the mountain. So like that, and then like that, if that makes sense. The sun shines in a holler only a few hours a day, and the woods within are dark and dense. Quote, "Most hollers don't have no view," observes Granny Younger in Lee Smith's novel Oral History. Small hollows are sometimes called cloves, likening them to the space in a goat's splayed hoof. End of entry. My dad and Bob built an actual log cabin in Johnson Holler on land deeded to them by Bob's family, descendants of the community's 19th century pioneer Thomas Sharp. They have since moved 2 miles down the hollow to the old Walker Place, which is a pretty little farm of 100 acres that sits in a broad spot where Johnson Hollow joins a small valley, which is why there's enough sun there for sour cherries. In 2009, my dad called to say that for once the sour cherry crop had escaped frost damage and that his 4 trees were loaded down. He threw netting over them and hung CDs among the branches to scare the birds. He called me weekly with updates. Luck stayed with us. The weather held, the birds were thwarted, and when the cherries finally started to turn, I booked a ticket home for cherry time. The sour cherry, Prunus cerasus, is one of the stone fruit clan, which also includes peaches, apricots, and plums. It is a different species from the sweet cherry, which is Prunus avium, a name that testifies to the fruit's popularity among the avian tribes. George Washington did not chop down a sour cherry tree. But then he didn't chop down a sweet cherry tree either. That story was made up by Parson Weems in his Life of George Washington, which the subtitle promises is full of curious anecdotes meant to instruct the nation's young citizenry. Cherries probably originated in Western Asia, but birds and man spread them across Europe in prehistoric times. According to the food historian Magdalene Toussaint-Sama, evidence from Stone Age sites suggests that wild cherry juice was being fermented even before grapes were first turned into wine. Cherries were cultivated by the ancient Greeks and Romans, but curiously, the fruit figures far less in our myth and literature than apples. Maybe it's the cherry's unheroic size. Rabelais caricatures a friar of parsimonious speech. Quote, nothing is to be got out of him but monosyllables. With the sarcastic jest, I believe he would make 3 bites of a cherry. Cherries also have a distinctly feminine connotation in the poetic tradition. The fruit is firm, dainty, roundly curved, and highly perishable, making it a perfect symbol of delicious but fleeting virginal beauty. The cherry was associated with the Virgin Mary for Renaissance painters, and theologians considered it a fruit of heaven in contrast with the apple, which represented man's fall. At the very dawn of the Renaissance, Italian poet Petrarch wrote his Rima Sparse, and it set off a craze for love poetry that burned through Europe for centuries. Countless imitators used his 14-line sonnet form and also embraced his highly wrought metaphors of skin as white as snow and cheeks like rose petals. Finally, the cherry's moment in poetry had arrived. In the most florid lyric poems of the age, the lover's face becomes an entire garden. As in Thomas Campion's There's a Garden in Her Face. There is a garden in her face where roses and white lily and there is a garden in her face where roses and white lilies grow. A heavenly paradise is that place, wherein all pleasant fruits do flow. There cherries grow, which none may buy, till cherry ripe themselves do cry. Cherry ripe was the call used by street vendors hawking their wares, and the sound must have echoed through London streets every spring. This is the poem Cherry Ripe from Robert Herrick, 1591 to 1674, his days. Cherry ripe, 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 I cry, full and fair ones, come and buy. If so be you ask me where they do grow, I answer, there, where my Julia's lips do smile. There's the land, or cherry isle, whose plantations fully show all the year where cherries grow. Fast forward a few more centuries to our own time, and the cherry still retains a residue of sensual appeal. The cherry on top is an extra something that caps a series of happy events. Even the cherry's erotic associations endure, as in the crude slang for virgin. The film The Witches of Eastwick, based on John Updike's novel, shows the devil, played by Jack Nicholson, and his coven of beautiful witches luxuriating by a pool and sucking down great bowls full of cherries. By means of a dark spell, the devil makes a local religious freak vomit up the pits until her husband bludgeons her to death with a phallic poker. In a more lyrical mood, Pablo Neruda writes in 20 love poems and one song of despair, I want to do with you what spring does with cherry trees. Sweet and sour cherries have been grown side by side at least since the time of Lucullus. Lucullus. Pliny or Pliny? Anybody? Is it Pliny or Pliny? Pliny? Pliny. Pliny the Elder credits the, you can see I read and write more than I talk. Pliny the Elder credits the famous gourmet, Lucullus, with introducing cherries to Italy, but scholars have withdrawn that honor, noting that the earlier Etruscans already had cherry orchards. Sour cherries are less popular today than they were 50 years ago, no doubt because they live up to their name. The second one's not as bad, is how my dad puts it. You have to get past that acid surprise to appreciate the flavor. The sour cherry is really a cooking fruit. My favorite dessert when I was growing up was Grand's cherry cobbler, made with sour cherries from 2 geriatric trees in the middle of Papaw's garden. Sour cherry pie is much better than sweet cherry pie, and the same is true of preserves. Sour cherry's only real drawback is that the pitting is tedious work. You extract the seed this way. Grasp a single cherry between the thumb and forefinger of one hand. With the other hand, hold its stem. Simultaneously squeeze with one hand while tugging with the other, and the pit will separate from the flesh. That motion must be repeated hundreds of times to prep for a batch of cherry preserves. In fact, let me say, I had an incredible book, editorial intern who worked with me one summer on this book. And he had made all kinds of great contributions. And one of the things that I asked him to do came at the end of the long day where I had been out to pick sour cherries in the morning, and then I'd come home to make a batch of sour cherry jam. And picking sour cherries takes forever, because sour cherries are really small. It's like a fourth the size of a sweet cherry. So you have to pick the cherries forever. And then you get home and you just pit them forever. It just takes hours. And I started to think, how many motions does it require to make this batch of sour cherry jam? Well, that I couldn't answer, but I took the pits from 5 pounds of sour cherries, and I gave them to intern Edward. And I said, would you count these for me? There were 808 pits in 5 pounds of sour cherries. Wow. So that motion must be repeated hundreds of times to prep for a batch of cherry preserves. A mature cherry tree produces a harvest that is measured by the bushel. Planting one is a commitment to substantial future labor. In places like Sharp's Chapel, though, that work is often sped along by conviviality. At my dad's farm is where I realized that canning work can be a social time, almost a form of entertainment. One afternoon, as my dad and I were in the kitchen pitting the cherries that we had picked that morning, the phone rang, likely a neighbor or relative, which are 2 categories that overlap substantially in Sharp's Chapel. "Hey," said Bob, taking the call. "What you doing?" He must have been asked the same question, because next he said, "Fred and Kevin are down here in cherries. They picked about 12 gallons. After a brief further exchange, Bob hung up the phone and said, "That was Dot. She said she's coming." Bob's sister Dot was soon walking in the back door. "I hear you is in cherries," she said. "Well, what took you so damn long?" said my dad, in a tone he has that makes anything funny. Dot poured herself a cup of black coffee, took one of Bob's cigarettes, and sat down at the table. After a minute or two to settle in and find her work rhythm, she started in with the news of the day. Who's pregnant? Who won the basketball tournament? Who will be coming in next week to visit so-and-so in the hospital where things are not looking too good? Over the next hour or so, there was talk of cherry pitting technique and cherry recipes, a recitation of stories, many already familiar, expressions of regret and relief about the weather's impact on this year's gardens, inquiries into the source of someone's particularly fine fruit trees or vegetables. To me, these conversations are what I most value about going home, because I always learn something around the table, much of it useless to other people, but precious to me, like that my Uncle David's sour cherry tree grew from a start off of Papaw's old trees, and therefore could provide a start for me if I ever had a place for an orchard. I guess you could characterize the afternoon as spending quality time with my father, but I would not. I'd call it pitting cherries together, and at the end of it, we were ready to make cherry preserves.
So we'll do a Q&A. Anybody has any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever seen a movie called The Draftsman's Contract?
No.
Like,
What is it called?
Resume. The Draftsman's Contract.
I've got to know that.
And was it that I think it was in the 1700s, and a lady, there was an estate, and they had orange trees on it, an orange grove. And they hired a man to come and illustrate, while the husband was on vacation from that estate, she hired an artist who was to draw 13 illustrations of the man's gardens.
Yes.
And it's really fun to watch. I saw it last year. You have to see it if it's on the big screen. It was a whole different movie. And it's just fun to watch. And then there's a theme of eating fruit. The lady gives the artist some fruit periodically in the movie, and it's really charming. I think his name's Peter Grunaway,
Okay.
G-R-E,
Oh, sure.
like the
Yeah.
artist.
Yeah.
And I think he's Australian. And did you see Prospero's books by him?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because there's a series of little short essays in here on the development of still life painting. And I'm really interested in sort of references, why I write it down. I'm really interested in the places where talk of seasons, where talk of jam, where talk of pickles sort of pops through in the literature, in the art history.
Me too.
Melville writes about pickles. Melville at least mentions pickles. There's a wonderful allusion to pickles, or sort of use of pickles as a metaphor in Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra gets mad at a messenger. She beats the messenger, and she threatens to lash him with wire and stew him in lingering pickle. He was about to find himself in a pickle, as we still say. So in a situation that stings, right?
Jam.
In a jam comes along much later.
Yeah.
Shakespeare didn't have the word jam. Jam, as we understand it, jam in its culinary use, and I write about the etymology of jam here, didn't come around until kind of early 19th century. I'm sorry, 18th century.
I just found out like last month, I was looking at Knott's Berry Farm jams and then preserves. I got the impression that preserves have the seeds in them and jam.
No, ma'am,
Oh,
that is
okay.
not correct.
Then they're Knott's Berry
But,
Farm.
so, that's boysenberry jam right there.
Yeah, so
Boysenberry is, it's one of the brambleberries. I'm going to get to your question, but I'm going to take a sort of circuitous route to get there. It's one of the brambleberries. The brambles are a fascinating family of fruit. Tom, thanks y'all for coming. It's nice to see you. And I sort of chart out the family, the genealogy, because it's a little complicated to get through. Boysenberry is a cross between the raspberry line and the blackberry line of brambleberries. It's a Southern California fruit. It's one of the few brambleberries that really thrives here in our climate, and it was the fruit that Knott's Berry Farm was built on.
Yeah.
Because it was Knott's Berry,
Walter Knott's
That's right.
and Cornelia.
But wait a second, I've gone so far and I've forgotten. Oh, so what's the difference between a preserve and a jam? Not much. Not much.
Not the seeds,
I
not
mean,
the
like
seeds.
sort of technically speaking, a jam is a fruit spread that is made by cooking crushed fruit or sliced fruit with sugar. A preserve is chunks of fruit or perhaps whole fruit, small whole fruit, cherry preserves, strawberry preserves, if it's all strawberries. So it's whole fruit or large chunks of fruit that are cooked with sugar into a sort of thickened syrup. So that's the difference between. But you know, a thick preserve is indistinguishable to my eye from a loose jam. So you know. Yes, sir.
I'm sort of naive and ignorant, but about this subject, the only thing that people have ever seen doing jarring or canning, you have used the hot water method, but you described other methods. And I'm curious, did those last just as long? If you said you were saying wrap or something like that?
Yeah. So the boiling water bath, canning, the water bath canning process is the most up-to-date way to do it. That's current technology. Old technology is what my grandmother did, which is she would fill a jar and then she would seal it with paraffin wax. And probably a lot of y'all have sort of seen that before, know about that. That's called the open kettle method. I don't know why it's called that, because the kettle doesn't have anything to do with it. It's called, you just don't process it. So open kettle method, you sterilize the jar first, you put the hot preserve in there, and then you seal it by whatever means. Maybe you put a lid on there, maybe you put paraffin wax. If you go back earlier, I talked about faint prints, sealing with cellophane. If you go back 19th century, you will find quite often the call to seal sweet preserves with brandy papers, which I've done. You take a piece of paper and you soak it in brandy, dunk it in brandy, and then you fold it over the top of the jar and you tie it with string. The brandy, of course, is antiseptic, and the paper, keeps mold spores and stuff from getting out. It actually works, reasonably well. If you go back even further, you'll see calls for the Thomas Dawson, which is like 1593, sort of that era, talks about sealing things with cork or with animal bladders, like a pig bladder. So technologies change. The water bath canner is the most up to date, and as someone who was trained in the master food preserving course, I am honor bound to advise you to always use the boiling water bath canning process in order to ensure optimum long-term shelf storage. The fact of the matter is, before people figured out how to do that, they were eating preserves for centuries.
Have you experimented with the other ways? I mean, you said you did the brandy paper, but have you tried them all out?
I haven't tried the animal bladder. No pig guts.
Is there a difference between the modern technology and the brandy paper or the other older ways?
Well, it's is there a difference
in the taste, in the way that it is?
No, the not that I can not that I can notice. I mean, someone may have a more subtle discernment than I do. But the boiling water bath is, you seal the jar, you put it in boiling water, usually for 10 minutes. The recipe will tell you how long. Usually for sweet preserves, it's always 10 minutes. And that's 10 minutes of heat does not, as far as I can tell, affect sweet preserves at all. Pickles will soften them in the boiling water bath. Pickles will soften. And so for that reason, there are certain recipes like cornichon, which I call for taking your little teensy cucumbers, your little gherkins, cleaning them, prepping them. You don't how much prep, you have to rub off the spines. You pack them into a jar. You put some tarragon in there, and just a very few pearl onions. And then you know what you do? Take white wine vinegar and just pour it over the top, cold. And then you put the lid on and stick it in the refrigerator if you want. And so, that's it. But the point of that is, in order to maximize, in order to maintain as much texture, as much crunch or crispness in the vegetable, you would avoid water bathing it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Do you ever
one
use
at a
the
time.
cherry pits in your, and do you smash them?
So the stone fruit, prunus,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
the genus prunus, includes, of course, cherries, apricots, peaches, nectarines, and almonds.
Right.
And so all of our sweet almonds that we eat are a kind of a Bronze Age, natural, what do I want to say? They can emerge spontaneously in the Bronze Age from the wild almond, which is a bitter almond. And a bitter almond is what is used to flavor marzipan, right? Like almond extract. Almond extract is usually created in a lab. But bitter almonds, like wild bitter almonds, is where that flavor comes from. Now, all of the other, and what that is, an almond is nothing but, the kernel of the seed of this kind of, plum-sized fruit, right? A little bigger than a plum. That flavor, that almond flavor, is common to all of the stone fruit. So if you crack a apricot kernel, you get this wonderful and really quite strong bitter almond flavor.
Amaretto flavor.
Yeah, it's an amaretto flavor, exactly. Cherry pits have the same thing. And in France, if you were going to make a clafoutis, you would make a clafoutis with, with whole cherries, because some little essence of that almond quality goes through the pit and infuses the clafoutis. To answer your question finally, I do not pit my cherries. I do not use the cherry pits just because it's too much damn work.
It really is, yeah.
But I use I use apricot pits in my apricot jam.
So
Or
do you
at least I provide the
smash it so that the kernel comes out, or do you feel like
No.
it flavors it without
Yeah,
smashing
you got it.
Yes.
You sort of crack with a nutcracker, blanch it, slip them out of the
Oh, okay.
and then you use the almond, which is white,
That little kernel.
moist, very pretty, and you put the kernels in there.
Okay.
And that's special. That's really magic. There's some dispute about that, and the most kind of serious and most footnoted essay or piece in the book is about apricot kernels. This practice of using the kernel is pretty widespread in Europe and in England. Here, what you hear is that the kernels are dangerous. They have cyanide.
Cyanide, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, they do produce cyanide. There's a molecule called amygdalin that, when it breaks down, releases cyanide.
Same as apple seeds, yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a question of, are they safe? Are they not safe? Is it safe to use your apricot kernels? The answer is yeah. And I really like to map it out in great detail, but the answer is yes. And I interviewed everybody in the world we had food scientists weighing in, the head of the stone fruit division at UC Davis, but you know what I mean. There were reports from reports from English scholarly societies, academic medical societies, but it's safe. You can do it. It's fine. And the reason why is that the heat in cooking, the heat volatilizes whatever
There you go.
we don't want to eat.
Okay, and then the second question is, are huckleberries from California or the Midwest?
There are a lot of different fruits of the genus Vaccinium. that are called huckleberries.
So are the
Like
huckleberries in
all over the
Jackson Hole,
country.
Wyoming, the same as the ones I eat up in San Luis Obispo?
They're probably different varieties.
They taste different.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
they're both
there are literally
huckleberries.
dozens of different varieties
Okay.
of and some are high bush, some are low bush.
So we didn't invent them here in
No,
California?
huckleberries are wild fruit.
But we didn't invent them?
Is a huckleberry a mulberry?
It kind of looks like a mulberry, but it's not. It's like a fat blackberry. It's kind of weird, yeah.
Yeah.
So is a mulberry.
It's a bramble. Isn't it a bramble?
No, a mulberry is this very
It's a
special
tree,
thing.
but a huckleberry is a bramble, isn't it?
No, a huckleberry is a huckleberry is related to blueberries, and Vaccinium also includes the cranberries.
Oh.
All of those native North American fruits that like acidic soil and cool climates. They're
Okay,
wonderful
thank
fruits. Let me, let's see, I'm just thinking of one thing. Let's see if I can find this. Let's see if I can find this. Mulberries. Yeah, 215. So, Persian mulberries. Sir, Persian mulberries are like
Sir.
fruit from a fairy tale, a familiar thing, the summer berry, transformed by preposterous imagination into something strange and enchanting. A besotted Titania orders her elves to fetch them for her. To fetch them for her beloved bottom in a midsummer's night's dream. She says to the elves, "Be kind and courteous to this gentleman, hop in his walk, and gambol in his eye, feed him with apricots and dewberries, with purple grapes, green figs, and mulberries." Blah, 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 blah. But unlike the boysenberries, they resemble Persian mulberries, Morus nigra, grow in trees. So they're not brambleberries, they're trees. And they are so fragile that you can hardly pick them without them bursting. The taste seems almost too sweet, but then a dark inner core, kind of a wine-like quality emerges, and it's very poignant.
They're in season right now. We just went to a farm dinner down in Temecula.
Yeah.
And the farmer gave us a whole bushel.
Oh my
Love
God.
them. My
You're
wife
kidding.
loved them so much. And
Well, count yourself lucky.
yeah, we gave them ours. We didn't have, we couldn't eat as many as they gave us. But
No, but you know what you do? You make jam. That's the point of saving the season, is that when you've got a particular thing at a particular moment, and you've got that perfection of fruit, and vegetables as well, but fruit is more fleeting. You got the perfection of the fruit, and you preserve it, and you put it in a jar, and then 6 months from now, you go back and you open that jar, and you still have that perfection in the jar. And there's another thing, which is that you capture a moment, and then you can give that jar to somebody else, and they open it up, and they share that moment, and you create a community. And that community is another way of talking about communion, perhaps, and it's another way of talking about like, conversation, and it's another way of talking about all the other stuff that I'm referring to when I talk about saving the season. So that's precisely what preserving is for.
everybody that got a batch of them, we were extremely happy
Yeah.
that they got a batch.
They're wonderful
You can't-
fruit.
It's really hard to find at the farmer's market, but they had just their trees were overflowing with.
Yeah. If you find it at the market, they're about $10 a punnet this summer, and it's worth it.
Yeah, they were so
The other thing that this is this week. In fact, what is today? No, we've already missed the market yesterday, the Wednesday market. But all of y'all go to the Hollywood Farmers Market this weekend and look for this: Blenheim apricots. I write about Blenheim apricots. They're one of the signature fruits of California. They're wonderful, wonderful, very special fruit. That's Blenheims. So the Blenheims are in. The mulberries, the Persian mulberries are in, which are better than the Pakistani mulberries. You want the Persian mulberries, and then Snow Queen nectarines, sometimes also known as Stanwick nectarines. It's white nectarine. White fruit tends to be insipid. Like who cares? Like I don't care about white. But these Snow Queens have high acid. And they have high sugar. The Brix is like 25, which is like insane sugar. And there's this incredible dynamic between the acid and the sugar that is electrifying. And it is the best stone fruit in the world, unless Blenheims are the best stone fruit in the world. So this is the week you got to go out and learn about stone fruit. I'm sorry, I'm preaching now. I'll stop. Any more questions? Yes, sir?
So you go from being editor of W Magazine to now a master preserver. Do you always have a passion for this?
Well, you know, I've cooked since I was a teenager. I guess I started cooking dinner when I was a teenager. I ate really well when I was growing up because, you know, at Grand Papal grew, they were not hobby farmers, they were like real farmers. And so Papal grew most of what they ate. And Grand was a real country cook, like good and plenty on the table. And she cooked, you know, whatever was coming out of the garden, and she put up a lot of stuff. She preserved a lot of food. So I liked to eat, and I was fortunate to have a very good training in how to eat. Later, when I went to took a year off from school and did a year off from college, went to college for 2 years, and then I took a gap year, which became 2 gap years as I floated around Berkeley and kind of hung around Japanese a little bit. And I learned that all of that stuff that Grand Papal were doing was called like local and seasonal and organic and farm to table, and you know, and I was like, oh, yeah, like that's what they did. Anyway, so I've been cooking for a long time, but it wasn't until really 2008 was when I started this preserving odyssey. I was at the farmers market, the Wednesday market, the Saturday market in Santa Monica. And it was springtime, and strawberries were out. And you know about, I already mentioned strawberries in here. There was a whole table full of strawberries. On page 52, if you got a book. That's me at 7 years old with a flat of strawberries. At the farmer's market, there were all these strawberries, and I was like, oh my God. And so I got a whole flat of them. And as I'm going back to the car, I'm like, what am I going to do with these? And that incredible fragrance made me think of Grand's Jam. And she was already gone by then. But I thought, yeah, I can make this. I mean, I make pizza, I make bread, pasta, you know, like I know how to cook. I set out to make some jam. It was to make Grand's Jam, and it was terrible. It was just terrible. And that frustration of not getting it right. And not getting it right the second time.
Why was it terrible?
The third time. Too much sugar. I used commercial pectin. I didn't know how to cook it, so I cooked it too long and too slow and too far, and it was it killed the fruit. You know, the point of all of this is to try to capture something of the freshness of the fruit, and I just stomped under my foot. And but that frustration was really what made me want to try again. And very quickly, that little weekend hobby became a true obsession. And I think that in fact, I know, I talk about my shrink in one of these things. Not much, y'all. But I sat on her couch for 5 years, and then I felt much better after that. And those 5 years included the time that I was preserving. So I think there was a kind of an element of personal discovery that helped fuel this obsession. But the obsession became a genuine obsession. And I wound up quitting my job, and like writing this book.
You worked at W?
I worked at W. I was on staff at W for 13 years.
Doing what?
I started as a party reporter in New York. I went on to write features about the social world in New York, including some hatch jobs on prominent social women that my editor loved. And I won the gold ring. I got sent to Paris as the European editor of the magazine, and I worked in Paris for 4 years. In Europe, I wrote more about travel and a little bit of food writing, the arts, culture. I did a little bit about the aristocracy and the social world, although not that much. And then I moved out here, still with W, in 2004, I think it was, as the West Coast editor of the magazine. And out here, I wrote about Hollywood, entertainment, art, mainly architecture, that kind of stuff, as a features writer. Yes, sir?
Have you gotten into wine with your discoveries and ferment or with preserving?
Well, I don't make any wine. I don't make any wine.
Drink it, you don't.
But I use pardon?
You drink it, but you don't make it.
I drink it. In the introduction to this pickled grape recipe, Mrs. Plagerman's pickled grapes, which is really a wonderful recipe. I say that it's that grapes are really hard to preserve, actually, unless you consider wine a preserve, which I kind of do, but I don't mess with wine. I cook with wine a lot, and I use wine in my preserves a lot, which is something kind of distinctive about my preserving practice.
Well, you have thinking like apple brandy, or
Yeah.
you could do so many different things.
Yeah, dude. I mean, you gotta get the book. You're speaking my language already. Yeah. Eau de vies, brandies, whiskeys. I use Scotch in one of my marmalades. Yeah, there's a lot of foods. I mean, Southerner, you know. we probably got to cut it off, but ma'am.
Oh, okay, you can pick which one you want to answer. It's either, I bought some mint jelly, like Reese's,
Yeah.
and then I put in the refrigerator. After a while, it made crystals, and it turned white.
Yeah.
And I want to know why that.
That's yeah. Okay.
And the other one is like, I bought a rhubarb pie from Dupar's,
Yeah.
and then I didn't come and pick it up until later that night.
Yeah.
So when I brought it home, I tasted what is it called, the sauce, like the liquid part, what would you call it, sauce? And it was chewy like a candy. And then I was gonna give it to somebody, and then I didn't wanna, I thought, I don't wanna give this because something's wrong. And then when I put it in the refrigerator, and the next day I had some, and it went back to being soft.
Now the pie, I don't know about.
Oh.
I can't.
Oh,
really
okay.
know. The jelly is that's a flaw. It's an error, and it happens sometimes. The sugar is recrystallizing for one basic reason, which is to say that there's too much sugar in there, so it has been over-reduced. It's been cooked too long.
And then there was what?
And you can't, as far as I know, it's not possible to uncrystallize it. You know, like honey, you know, like crystallized honey,
Yes.
you can melt it in a pan of hot water. I don't think you can do that with jelly, although I've never actually tried it.
And then
Tried
there was
to do it.
white, what would I had some red pepper jelly, and it looked like paraffin, I don't know if it was, but it looked white. It made the.
You know what they say? The old saying is, if in doubt, throw it out.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Now, I will, will you indulge me for one more thing? Because this is the other thing that everyone is so concerned about. When I say canning, what's the first word that comes to mind?
Botulism.
Yes. That is right. Yes, ma'am. That is right.
I'm a master food preserver.
So, botulism. What is botulism? Botulism is food poisoning, right? It's a food poisoning that's caused by ingesting a neurotoxin created by the bacterium, a class of bacteria called Clostridium botulinum. Clostridium botulinum is a spore-forming bacteria, ubiquitous in the natural world. The spores are like everywhere. It's an anaerobic bacteria, which means that it grows in the absence of oxygen, right? So these spores are incredibly hardy. They're incredibly tough. They will survive boiling they'll survive boiling. If you take one of those spores and you put it in a comfortable environment where there's water and nutrients and a temperature range that's more or less the same temperature range that we like, and you exclude all oxygen, like in a sealed jar, those spores will start to divide. And as part of their metabolic process, they create this neurotoxin. If you eat the neurotoxin, it causes a creeping paralysis that begins at the top of your head. I'm not making this up. It begins at the top of your head, and it descends. And one of the classic indications that someone is suffering botulism is that they can no longer move their face. And I'm not talking about Botox, which of course is from botulism. It's from Clostridium botulinum. That's the
my
neurotoxin.
God.
But so this is real. So it comes down, and then you can't move your mouth, and then the creeping paralysis descends, and then it hits your vital organs, and then you die.
Oh.
And even in this day and age, there's no remedy. It will pass. The paralysis will pass within 48 to 72 hours. But if you don't have the function of your heart and lungs, you will be long dead. So the only thing you can do for botulism, for a case of botulism, is to rush somebody to the hospital, put them in an iron lung, and keep them alive until it passes and they regain their organs start to function again. All right, so we're now all really scared, right? But there is a silver bullet against botulism, and it is acidity. High acid foods, which for the purposes of food safety are defined as pH below 4.6, high acid foods are not susceptible to the risk of botulism. High acid foods include most of the fruits, citrus, of course, apples, berries, strawberries, peaches, all of the stone fruits. All but a very few fruits are sufficiently acidic to eliminate the risk of botulism. So, listen to me. You are never going to kill your friends and family with a jar of jam. The only way you can hurt someone with a jar of jam is by throwing it at them. Low acid foods, like vegetables, like meat, that stuff is potentially dangerous. And home canned, well, can-to-can low acid foods, you have to do it in a pressure canner or in an autoclave, which is the big industrial version of that, because that pressurized environment will increase the boiling point of water, will increase the temperature, the atmospheric temperature within the container to above 240 degrees, and that will kill off the botulism. Or the other way you preserve vegetables is you pour vinegar over it. And so you take that low acid vegetable and you cover it with a vinegar brine, and the acidity in vinegar will prevent the risk of botulism. Did I answer the question I was supposed to answer?
It's just good news that we won't kill our friends,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, but this kind of goes with the whole botch. I mean, I'm not a canner, but I have a friend who's she puts up food every year and she gives it as gifts every year, and I sometimes can't keep up with every year's gifts because I get a lot of them. How long do they last?
Well, this is what I say, is that the preserves will, the classic advice is to eat them within a year.
Okay, so it's a big
Because
jam.
for a year, over the course of a year, you will not notice an appreciable change in the quality of the product. Some of the more delicate berry preserves, like a raspberry jam, like a wild strawberry jam, I think they're best for, like within 6 months, and then the quality starts to fade a little bit. Some of the more durable preserves, like marmalade, can last for years, many years. And there's even in England a certain sort of connoisseur's cult of vintage marmalades. Now, but here's the thing: if the preserve goes longer than that, the concern is not that a health risk emerges. The concern is that the quality of the product starts to fall off. So, we're not stocking a bomb shelter. We're trying to find a nice condiment that we
Right,
can eat.
well, and
so
you want to use
we
the
wanna
thick jam
use
and
it.
you want to use the, preserved lemons, but
Yeah.
then if you're not really,
Yeah,
I just want to make sure that
yeah.
I don't want to get rid of it.
Use it within a
I
year.
can still use it.
Yeah. The other reason you want to use it within a year is because next year this time we're going to have more blood and mapricots that we gotta
And
preserve.
I will have more
And
thick jam and I'll have more lemons, trust me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sooner than you think.
Yeah.
So maybe one more?
One more? Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am.
So I just made jam for the first time this week, and
Congratulations.
I just wasn't sure about the pectin, so I tried a batch with and without, but I don't know if that's is that just preference?
Well, pectin is the second subject that people are most curious about or most concerned about. And I'll give you the whole pectin talk here in the book. Here's the short version. Pectin is naturally occurring in all fruits. It's a molecule that makes up the part of the structure of the cell wall. And pectin is, most fruits have sufficient natural pectin to make a jam that reaches the consistency that we want it to reach. And that could sometimes be like a full gel set, like jelly. Jelly is a full gel set, right? This is just a thickened preserve. Those aren't quite fully set up. It is possible, in fact, many people will add a commercial pectin supplement. Those commercial pectin supplements are not inherently unnatural. They are derived from either citrus, which is very high pectin fruit, or apples, which are very high pectin fruit. And they have their place and they have their purpose. And there's one recipe in here for cherry preserves using powdered pectin, just to sort of demonstrate what it's about.
Please help me give a very, very, very warm thank you. There are some samples of some preserves over there. There's boysenberry and there's apricot, so you should go and have some if you haven't had some already. It's really great. And we'll set up a table here, and you can just line up against against travel writing, and I'm sure Kevin will gladly sign some books for you. Thank you very much.